Okay, I want to just begin by thanking the Revson Foundation, the Architectural League of New York, and the Center for an Urban Future. It's a real pleasure to be able to start the design process with such rigorous and comprehensive research as the foundation, and pretty rare. This is a project which we're calling L+. It's a collaboration between a number of different parties. I'm Brad Samuels. I'm a partner at C2 Studio. MTWTF is a graphic design firm based in Long Island City, Queens. Jessica Blaustein teaches at the New School in the Media Studies Department. Lauren Comito and Christian Zabriskie are co-founders of Urban Librarians Unite, as well as being librarians within the Queens system. Jesse Keenan is the research director at the Center for Urban Real Estate at Columbia, and Rachel Meltzer at the Milano School, also at the New School. So what I'm going to show you today is really the result of about 10 weeks of intensive collaboration between all of us. And we want to start with a very simple observation, which is that the role of the library has changed, but that the space of the library desperately needs to catch up. As we think about the future of branch libraries, we must address one fundamental question above all others, and that is, how do we realign the design of the institution to match contemporary needs? We feel like this is a paradigm shift which needs to be addressed first through a question of program, and what is the function of the library today? So although libraries still provide a traditional array of services, they also increasingly offer a breadth of non-traditional programs. They function as sites of innovation and programming tailored to community-specific needs. So in short, what we found is basically that libraries literally do everything, and that this is something we need to acknowledge, it's something we need to embrace, and in this context, it's something we really need to design for. So New York in particular, we feel needs a flexible solution which can enhance the foundations of the existing systems while also providing new solutions. So L+ is a proposal for a flexible, replicable, and easily deployable system that's intended to do three principal things. First, to extend the footprint of the library. Second, to close service gaps. And third, to basically supplement programming with new and innovative types of functions. We looked at two types of locations, two typologies, one within existing libraries, so branches may have community rooms in which L+ could be inserted, or you may have non-traditional library spaces, which we're calling outposts, which could be storefronts, transportation hubs, shopping malls, etc. So we begin with this question of program. This is really where the research started. And we basically took Cuff's report and we just basically tried to codify all of the things the program currently offers formally. Book lending is not a surprise, but a lot of this was a kind of revelation for us. Early childhood development, citizenship classes, computer and digital services. We then combined with that sort of anecdotal evidence of what actually is happening within libraries that may not appear on the schedule. Also a very robust list. Neighborhood gathering spaces, cooking classes, self-publishing help, ad hoc tech help. And then finally, potential programming. What could the future libraries do? Some of this is already happening in other parts of the country, but for whatever reason is not yet happening in New York. So co-working spaces, media labs, tool lending, recording studios, maker spaces, etc. So in this sense, we compiled a list, which it's important to point out is not comprehensive in any way. It's diverse, it's a long list, but we felt like we were just really scratching the surface here. Jessica Blaustein took this list and she did a really kind of interesting study of all of the kind of minutiae and granular information you might need to know about when executing any of these programs at times of day, what constituents they might serve. And we ended up with this very long and somewhat unwieldy spreadsheet. So how do we turn this into a tool which becomes useful for us as designers? The first thing we did was to basically take the programs and to put them into subcategories, so 15 plus programs become 13 overall categories. We then look at functional and technical requirements. What would be the kind of things you would need to deliver to realize any of these programs either in isolation or in combination with each other. And then ultimately what we get is a kind of revised matrix which can be thought about on the program type level, more granularly, specific programs in the vertical axis, and then the horizontal axis, the functional and technical requirements. And the idea here is that this gives us the opportunity to quickly identify what you would need as a designer, both in terms of functional requirements, but also the provision of power, electricity, wireless provisions, computers, et cetera. And in some sense, this ends up being a kind of menu. And that's the idea. This is an a la carte approach which could be drawn upon to insert any combination of these programs into a community very efficiently and effectively, and really ends up driving what we're calling this kit of parts. So here, this is a direct translation of that programmatic study. These are components of furniture, work surfaces, shelving, display, storage, signage, infrastructure. Any of this could be mobilized depending on what the requirements were. As we design this kit of parts, we think about two primary design considerations, principally one, that everything needs to be really flexible. This is all in anticipation of many different activities happening within the same space. So can we make foldable chairs, foldable tables, stools that stack, places to put everything, and get reconfigured to allow a degree of flexibility. And then also infrastructure. The provision of power we take for granted, but in the current branch libraries, people are fighting over outlets. So how do we deliver that effectively, efficiently from an infrastructure point down to a work surface as a kind of hot surface? The idea here is you should be able to reach out within arm's length and plug in your laptop, charge your phone, et cetera. So this is all kind of not site-specific. It's decontextualized. The next part of this study was choosing sites. What is the criteria for where this might make sense in the city? Christian and Lauren, again, helped us establish community rooms that might be interesting places to pilot this. We also looked at outposts, which are really neighborhoods that have very specific needs. And I'll come back to the criteria that led us to choose these in a moment. While we're doing this, Rachel Meltzer did this really rigorous and sort of on-the-ground study of what it would take to actually get this done in the neighborhoods we're talking about. So she spoke to business improvement districts, she spoke to landlords, she spoke to brokers, and basically, created a sort of survey of the market logistics. And the biggest takeaway here is that the city is actually an appealing tenant, which is, of course, needs to be the premise for everything else. There were some concerns about the delay in lease initiation with the city, but we thought that they could be overcome. Promising locations, places where you could have, price discounts would be fulfilling community space requirements, persistently vacant storefronts, second floor spaces that had, of course, ADA compliance, nonprofit or city-owned spaces. The prices, it's not a surprise, vary dramatically depending on where in the city you were looking at. But the partnerships, I think, was also one of the biggest takeaways. You need a really strong partner in these situations. The bids emerged here as somebody we felt could really efficiently and effectively implement these within the neighborhoods in which they themselves are situated. So back to the question of sites. How do we choose these? Three basic overarching categories kind of emerged and reemerged. Geography, so both geographic isolation, places that are cut off for whatever reason, as well as points of connectivity and sort of nexus, so both transportation hubs as well. Saturation was also a theme that came up a lot. This is the idea that branch libraries are frequently operating beyond their capacities. So how could you locate an outpost as a satellite within proximity, absorb some of that programming which is currently overtaxing the branch, and allow the branch to rededicate itself to its core competencies? And then, of course, community needs. Which communities might have very specific needs that could benefit from a very customizable and tailored approach to reprogramming spaces? So ultimately, we chose three to look at for the sake of this presentation. In some sense, this is an arbitrary selection. The idea is that this is a replicable, scalable approach, which could be implemented anywhere in the city. We basically chose these because they represented three different scales of intervention. So Astoria is a community center. This is the existing branch in Astoria. The smallest scale, Macon branch in Bedford-Stuyvesant, medium scale, and then the Staten Island Ferry Terminal, the largest of the three. We'll start with Astoria. So this branch is located in a very sort of active and diverse community. It has a community room that's there, but it's pretty underutilized space and somewhat, frankly, unappealing to use currently. So the question for us first started on the outside of the building. How do we announce that there's this new programming that resides within? We think about signage as a way to do that, prominently displaying schedules, but we kind of extend it beyond the facade to wayfinding, basically. What we found is that the community rooms are often buried in the bowels of buildings, in the back of buildings. Nobody knows where they are. So a pretty radical approach to either whether it's super graphics or painting the floor, et cetera, helping the visitor get from the street to this new location. We then draw upon this menu, right, to identify the programs, and it really shouldn't be us that's identifying these. That you talk about community engagement, it should be the librarians in the community that decides what needs to go there. But they could use something like this to then allow us to quickly decide what needs to get deployed. So program selection. Here we look at ESOL classes, Storytime, and Startup. And I'll just play a quick animation. So a large immigrant population in Astoria, would make sense to have ESOL classes there. The Storytime and the Startup classes were all kind of chosen partially because it's a really diverse and flexible sort of arrangement, just for the sake of presentation here. So ESOL classes, what would that look like? Perhaps a more conventional setup, long desks, somebody leading a class at the front. Storytime, the desks go away, the chairs are folded up, they're put in the closet, and stools which were previously stacked come out and get arrayed fairly easily. And then finally, startup consult. Maybe those desks are reaggregated in smaller clusters with facilitated workshops. A closet is open that contains AV equipment and printers and things that might be used by entrepreneurs and the like. So Macon branch and Outpost is the second case study. So this is not this is an outpost that's in relation to an existing branch. Macon is a Carnegie branch which was renovated in 2006, but currently plays host, basically functions as a teen center on top of all of its other programming. So is there a scenario in which you could, locate an outpost nearby within proximity and absorb some of that young adult programming? So here we found a retail space that might make sense within, basically a block. And again, we think about it first from the outside. How do we announce to the community that this is there, this is a resource? Is it signage? Is it a mural or a super graphic of some sort? But then also, really important, the schedule. How do we prominently display a schedule in the window, not just to deliver the basic information of what's happening at what time, but to be large enough and designed enough to really become iconic. This idea of a user-generated content somehow representing this outpost in the community. Of course, then it becomes easy to distribute that same type of information across platforms. And again, we look at a series of different programs, in this case, skewed towards a young adult demographic, the teen center. Makerspace, we feel like would be something that would be really well used in this community. And then cooking classes, which you've heard about today, occurring already in the libraries around New York, perhaps a bit more informally. So first, the makerspace. We're showing this here with the kind of infrastructure integrated, and this is in anticipation of inheriting spaces which you may not want to open the walls, you may not want to deal with what's above the ceiling and all the kind of bird's nest of electrical and et cetera. Perhaps you're just bringing in this infrastructure and you're providing points of connectivity. You see someone here plugging in their soldering iron, there's someone with a 3D printer nearby, a large work surface, and a closet which has all of the tools. Again, the community center rearranges those desks into smaller clusters. And then finally, the cooking class, which we feel like there's probably going to be opportunities here to take advantage of existing infrastructure. This may have been a restaurant, we don't know. If it was, why not keep the sink? Why not keep the hood? And make it a kind of formal offering of this outpost. We also think this is an interesting a potential opportunity to involve the community in the facilitation of these types of activities. So you see here someone conducting a cooking class that maybe is not a staff of the BPL. We feel like this could also sort of, involve the community, but also unload some of the pressure on staffing. Finally, St. George, Library Center and Outpost. This is in Staten Island. Again, an existing branch. The St. George Library Center, which offers great service to the local community, but also exists in close proximity to the ferry terminal, the Staten Island Ferry Terminal. A very interesting sort of set of folks we'd be serving here. This is a commuter population. They're here in 30-minute blocks. It's also the third most visited tourist attraction or tourist site in the city, mostly for the ride on the ferry. But basically a captive audience and a transient audience. So in this case, we're placing the outpost in the center of this waiting area. It's a standalone structure. And again, we think about programming that might make sense for this sort of population that's in flux. We look to an exhibition space first. So of course the primary idea behind the infrastructure is to deliver power and lighting, et cetera, but it also becomes a kind of framework upon which revolving exhibitions could be mounted and displayed. You see the carts of books coming out of the outpost, extending the footprint in this location. Here, lectures, tutorials, we'd have to be very concise and punchy lectures for these kind of 30-minute blocks, but a screen would drop down and you'd have someone presenting. In the foreground, and I want to just pause and talk about this for a moment, you see carts that have books on them. We've got two ideas about how we would work with collections here. One, we feel like Staten Island in particular would be a major point for pickup and drop-off, so we really use the floating collection to its full capacity here, and that's something in Astoria, in Macon, and in this case we'd plan to do and throughout. But also a kind of carefully curated and site-specific collection of books that would could be lent, but would always come back to this place. And we feel like this is an important counterpoint to the floating collection to help provide sort of identity for the community it serves. And then finally, the performance space. This is an interesting possibility because it potentially combines formal and informal activities. You might have scheduled performances, but you could probably just as easily imagine ad hoc, informal performances occurring in a transportation hub. Here we've created a set of bleachers, which would allow people to sit, wait for the ferry, watch the performance, but also plug in and use their laptops to get some work done as well. So in conclusion, we really are thinking about this L+ approach as an efficient and affordable alternative to constructing new ground-up buildings. We feel like the lower financial and frankly political thresholds that might be required to do some of this present opportunities to really incubate some of these ideas, to test them, to fail, but hopefully to codify and establish the new programming that will be the future of branch libraries. So in this sense, while we certainly feel like there's a future for grand central libraries, we feel like the future of the branch library is not monumental. Rather, it is distributed and it is magnetic. Thank you.